Imagine a queen, draped in royal silks, her crown heavy with jewels, standing motionless as her own son's head is placed on the executioner's block. Her face is stone, but her heart is shattering. Why would a mother, a queen, watch such a horror? What could drive a woman of power to witness her child's final breath? You're about to uncover a story so gripping, so heartbreaking, that it haunted a kingdom for centuries. Stay with me because this tale of loyalty, betrayal, and sacrifice will leave you questioning everything you know about power and love. In the heart of 16th century Europe, where crowns were won with blood and lost with whispers, lived Margaret of Austria, a queen whose name echoes through history not for her conquests but for a single agonizing moment. Born in 1480, Margaret was no stranger to loss. Her life was a tapestry of political marriages, dead siblings, and a father, Emperor Maximilian I, who saw her as a pawn in his grand chess game of empires. By the time she was 24, she'd been widowed twice, her dreams of a quiet life buried with her husband's. Yet Margaret was no wilting flower. She rose to become the governor of the Netherlands, a regent whose sharp mind and iron will held together a fractured realm. But nothing could prepare her for the day she'd face her son's execution, not as a distant rumor but as a witness standing mere feet from the scaffold. Let's step back to understand how this tragedy unfolded. Margaret's son, Philip, was not a prince of royal blood but a child of her heart, born to her during her second marriage to Philibert of Savoy. Philip was a young man of promise, with his mother's keen intellect and his father's charm. In the bustling courts of Brussels and Mechelen, he was known for his wit and his loyalty to the Habsburg dynasty, the family that ruled half of Europe. But loyalty in those days was a double-edged sword. The year was 1528, and the Netherlands were a powder keg. Noble families jostled for power, the Protestant Reformation was stirring unrest, and Emperor Charles V, Margaret's nephew and Philip's cousin, demanded absolute obedience. Philip, however, had a fatal flaw. He dreamed of a Netherlands free from the emperor's iron grip. Philip wasn't alone in his ambitions. A faction of nobles, calling themselves the League of Liberty, saw in him a figurehead for their cause. They whispered of reform, of a realm where local lords, not distant emperors, held sway. Philip, young and idealistic, listened. He attended secret meetings, penned letters that should have been burned, and spoke words that would later be twisted into treason. Margaret, as governor, knew the dangers of dissent. She'd spent years balancing the demands of her nephew, the emperor, with the grumbling of her subjects. She warned Philip to stay clear of the League, her voice sharp with a mother's fear. "You're playing with fire," she told him, her eyes searching his. But Philip, like so many young men, believed he could outwit fate. The turning point came in the spring of 1528. A spy loyal to Charles V infiltrated the League's ranks. Letters bearing Philip's seal were seized, their contents damning. They spoke of rallies, of funds raised for arms, of a future where the Netherlands stood apart. To Charles this was not just rebellion, it was personal. Philip was family, a cousin raised in the Habsburg fold, yet he dared to challenge the emperor's divine right. The order came swiftly. Philip was to be arrested, tried, and made an example. Margaret received the news in her chambers, the parchment trembling in her hands. She knew Charles's temper, his unrelenting need for control. She pleaded for mercy, sending letters that spoke of Philip's youth, his misguided passion. But Charles's reply was cold. Treason spares no one, not even kin. The trial was a formality held in the grand hall of Mechelen's palace. Philip stood before a panel of judges, his hands bound, his face pale but defiant. The charges were read: conspiracy, sedition, treason against the crown. Witnesses, some coerced, others eager to curry favor, testified to his involvement with the League. Philip's defense was simple. He sought reform, not rebellion. He loved his family, his emperor, his mother. But the judges, handpicked by Charles, had no room for nuance. The verdict was unanimous: death by beheading. Margaret was not in the courtroom. She was in her private chapel, praying for a miracle that never came. Why, you might ask, would Margaret choose to watch her son's execution? Why not stay away, spare herself the pain? To understand, we need to see her not just as a mother but as a ruler. In the 16th century, a queen's presence at such an event was a statement. To absent herself would signal weakness, perhaps even complicity in Philip's actions. Charles had made it clear, Margaret's loyalty to the Habsburgs was under scrutiny. Her governorship, her legacy hung in the balance. Yet this was no simple act of political survival. Margaret believed, perhaps naively, that her presence might sway Charles to grant a last-minute pardon. She'd seen him bend before, swayed by family ties. And deep down she couldn't bear the thought of Philip facing his end alone. The execution was set for a crisp October morning in 1528, in the central square of Mechelen. A crowd gathered, their breaths visible in the chill air. Merchants, nobles, and common folk pressed against the barriers, drawn by the spectacle of a fallen noble. The scaffold stood stark against the gray sky, the executioner's axe gleaming. Margaret arrived in a closed carriage, her face hidden by a veil. She stepped out, her black gown stark against the cobblestones, and took her place on a raised platform reserved for the court. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some pitied her, others saw only a queen complicit in her son's doom. Philip was led out, his steps steady despite the chains. He scanned the crowd, his eyes finding his mother's. For a moment they held each other's gaze, a silent exchange of love and regret. The executioner read the sentence, his voice carrying over the murmurs. Philip was given a moment to speak. His words were brief. "I die for my beliefs, but I bear no hatred. Forgive me, mother." Margaret's hands clenched in her lap, but her face remained composed, a mask of royal dignity. The executioner raised his axe. The crowd held its breath. And then, with a single sickening thud, it was over. Philip's body slumped, and the square erupted in gasps and cries. Margaret didn't flinch, didn't cry out. She stood, her back straight, and left the square as silently as she'd come. But those closest to her saw the tremble in her hands, the way her veil shook as she turned away. What happened next is a testament to Margaret's strength and her heartbreak. She returned to her duties as governor, her resolve unbroken but her spirit forever changed. She never spoke of Philip publicly again, but those in her inner circle noticed a new weight in her eyes, a quiet sorrow that lingered until her death in 1530. Some say she kept a lock of Philip's hair in a locket, hidden beneath her gowns. Others claim she wrote letters to him, letters she burned in the fire, as if the flames could carry her words to the son she'd lost. Charles V, for his part, never mentioned the execution, but he granted Margaret greater autonomy in the Netherlands, perhaps a silent acknowledgement of her sacrifice. This story isn't just about a queen and her son. It's about the cost of power, the clash between duty and love, and the impossible choices that define a ruler's life. Margaret's decision to watch Philip's execution wasn't weakness. It was a final act of love, a mother's refusal to abandon her child in his darkest hour. It's a moment that resonates across centuries, reminding us that even those who wear crowns are human, bound by the same grief and hope as the rest of us. For Americans watching, this tale might feel distant, set in a world of emperors and scaffolds. But think about it, how many times have we seen leaders, even today, forced to choose between personal loyalty and public duty? Whether it's a president facing a scandal or a CEO navigating a crisis, the tension is the same. Margaret's story is universal because it's about the heart, not just the throne. It's about standing tall when the world expects you to break. Let's reflect on what we've learned. First, power comes at a price. Margaret paid it with her son's life. Second, loyalty can be a trap, as Philip learned too late. And third, love, even in the face of tragedy, can be an act of defiance. Margaret didn't just watch an execution. She bore witness to her son's courage, ensuring his story wouldn't be forgotten. You can apply this to your own life. When faced with impossible choices, what will you stand for? Who will you stand by? If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who loves history as much as you do. Drop a comment below. Tell me, what would you have done in Margaret's place? Could you have stood there, or would you have looked away? And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell, because we've got more gripping tales coming your way. Next up, you won't believe the horrific end of Richard Roos, a man boiled alive for his crimes. Trust me, you don't want to miss it.